Hi, I'm Mark Lawson, president of MorningStar Music Publishers, and I am glad to be here today with composer and organist Michael Burkhardt. Michael has just released a new collection that's entitled In Thee Is Gladness, and it's an unusual collection for Michael in that it is a collection actually of Paul Manz, rediscovered Paul Manz settings. And so we're going to talk with Michael a little bit about that. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, tell us all where you found these manuscripts of Paul Manz and kind of how the process went.
Well, I literally found them by accident. I was snooping around on the internet, and then I discovered this Center for Church Music at Concordia University in Chicago. And part of this center houses manuscripts from various Lutheran composers. And there were manuscripts from Paul. They included his psalm antiphons and psalm settings for worship, as well as manuscripts for some of his published anthems, and then some harmonizations that I had never seen before. And so that's what's included in this collection. And the editing process was, first of all, to look at them, and it kind of became a little historical look in that to see how we've modified the tunes since those settings were written, both rhythmically or melodically. So in the present edition, it includes the original form and the original keys that Paul wrote his settings in, but then also settings that have been modified, not in terms of their musical composition, but in terms of rhythm or melody, so that people who are using more current hymnals will have settings that they can use and match what they already know.
Right. Much of Paul's work was done based upon the Lutheran hymnal of, I think, 1941 or something like
1941.
that. So a lot of you see the evolution of how congregations have lowered the keys over the years, I think, in many cases.
Lowered the keys and gone back to more original rhythms in some of the German chorales.
Well, Paul, of course, was very influential as an organist, and his work is still played today, and his recordings are still popular. But for those that don't know Paul, and of course, Paul died in 2009, tell us about your relationship with Paul and his influence upon your life.
Well, I can say unequivocally that he is the reason I became an organist. And I remember distinctly, I was in eighth grade. The pastor at my church took me to the big city of Milwaukee, and we heard Hugo Gerke play an organ recital. I know he played some Baroque stuff, but he ended with the Paul Manz Partita on St. Anne, which at the time was still in manuscript, and he played from Paul's manuscript. And while I enjoyed the whole program, it was the Paul Manz Partita that just captivated me, partly because as a young person, I knew the tune, but I couldn't believe how much fun it was to hear that tune being presented in so many different ways. And it seemed like in each of the variations of that partita, Paul had what Hal Hobson told me once, a hook that he caught the listener's imagination and attention with those hooks. And so as a young person, I begged my parents for his 4 long playing records at that time, and I got them for Christmas that very year. And I listened to them over and over and memorized all of the pieces. I couldn't play a single one, but I knew them all in my head and could sing along with them. And certainly they got me excited about what the possibilities were for introducing congregational song and then as well as leading it. And later on in my career, I was teaching at Concordia University in Irvine, California. I was able to take a mini sabbatical during the month of January and spend 2 weeks with Paul when he was the organist at St. Luke's in Chicago. And we met every day, and I would have a couple hours to prepare something according to his parameters that he set. I'd play for him, and then we'd start the process over. So that was a wonderful, wonderful experience to have and to gain some insight into how he went about doing things and his thought processes. And over time became friends. And one of the neat things is we don't know how much the circle of life will involve us. But when I was minister of music in St. Louis Park, a suburb of Minneapolis, his grandchildren were in my children's choir. And so it was
That's
fun to return, but also a gift to be able to share with them what he had shared with me.
right, right. So, what would you say to maybe young organists who don't know much about Paul Manz? What would you say about where to start, or why it's important to know about his work?
Well, number one, I think they need to know that I would consider him the father of the American Hymn Festival. He popularized hymn singing like no one else did during his era, and many of us have joined the tradition in doing so, but he really kind of set the stage for that. So I believe he's important for that very reason, but also for the compositions that he has left. And whether you're a Lutheran or not, the hymn tunes that he has arranged and improvised on are common to most denominational hymnals. They're creative, they're well crafted, and I think they're an important part of the repertoire that we have.
Hmm.
Um, Many of my students don't even know the name Paul Manz because they didn't grow up either in the church or they grew up in the church where the organ wasn't a real big part of worship. So I think it's important for them to get to meet him and his music through me. And I think that's probably true of other teachers in the country. And, while you and I know the wonderful treasures he has left us, treasures are only treasures if people know about them and get to use them. It's kind of like in my mom's house, we had this linen closet of treasures, and they only came out once a year. And at the end, they never came out anymore. So they were no longer treasures. And I think the same thing applies to us, in terms of
Hmm.
music. We know that the treasures of J.S. Bach were lost for many years until Mendelssohn revived them. And then for a while it was not a cool thing to play Mendelssohn. So we didn't play Mendelssohn. And then all of a sudden we decided Mendelssohn was important to play because it led us to learn other pieces from the classical romantic era. So I think we need to make these treasures known to people
Hmm.
via
Hmm.
publications like you are doing at MorningStar, to continue to play them ourselves, model them in worship and also in our teaching, as well as to direct them to places where they can hear them, online or via their whatever their tech
Yeah.
means are.
So, how would you go about using this collection? And I guess, do you have any favorites that you'd mention in them?
What I try to do as part of my lessons, there's always at some point during each term some hymn playing work that goes on. It's done purely, in my case, since I teach at a public university, just as we need to be aware of the various traditions that organists will be asked to be involved in. And we do it in relationship in order, how do you lead singing rather than accompany singing? And I would use these as possibilities for written out examples of what they might use in their own worship. And perhaps I would include them and will and do include them when we are learning a hymn, just to play it in its traditional sense from the hymnal, but then providing a creative alternate to what's in the hymnal, sometimes simply using them as an introduction to the hymn, other times using them as a free harmonization to the hymn. While all of them are based on German chorales, 7 of the 10 German chorales in the collection are common to most denominations. And two of my favorites are the Wacket auf, setting and the settings of Nun komm der Heiden heiland, Wake Awake, and Savior of the Nations Come. And I think for me, why I think his music is important and why maybe this collection is important, it encapsulates some of the harmonies that he used when he led hymns in his hymn festivals around the country. And the best way I could describe what he's done, they're very traditional in the sense, but he has this knack of adding a color note to a chord that will either enhance the chord, make it bigger as a seventh, ninth, 11th, or 13th, or sometimes he'll replace a traditional note of a traditional chord with the wrong note, but it sounds right. And it gives kind of that uniqueness about it, and it perks up our ears to listen and perhaps even sing a little bit better when we hear those harmonies supporting us underneath.
Well, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm hoping that people will take a listen to these. We've got them all recorded and they're on the website. And so I thank you for taking time to talk, and thank you for your support of Paul Manz and remembrance of him. It was a very meaningful conversation.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for publishing his works.
Bye. Have a good day.
You too.